Hey guys, tonight we drift way back to a time when monks wore scratchy robes, maps were more decorative than helpful, and the sea was full of things no one had the language to explain. You're bundled in a boat made of wood, wool, and hope, somewhere off the coast of Ireland, and fog creeps across the horizon like spilled milk. You squint. Is that land? Or maybe lunch? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the shore, or at least what you think is a shore, the floor of your coracle gently rocking like a cradle. Every step is damp. Your wool sandals are soaked through again, and the salty sea air clings to your tongue like spoiled honey. You haven't seen proper land in days, just a series of floating maybe islands that seem suspiciously mobile. Your goal? Spread a little gospel, maybe find a new patch of grass for your abbey's sheep. But the sea has its own plans. Your fellow monk, Brother Cuthbert, is at the back of the boat, chewing a piece of hard bread and muttering prayers in Latin. You pretend to understand them. Truth be told, you're too busy watching the mist, because in the distance, there it is, in a vague shape, dark and humped. It looks solid, sort of. Could be an island, could be a rock, could be lunch. You row closer, the boat creaking in protest. As the shape takes form, you notice there's no vegetation, just glistening wet skin. You glance at Brother Cuthbert. Do rocks breathe? You ask. He stops chewing. Only if God wills it. That's not comforting. You reach the edge of the shape, still thinking island, and poke it with your staff. It jiggles, slightly, but you're so tired, and you have a fish to roast. So naturally you build a fire. For about 3 peaceful minutes, you're the proud pioneer of a new micro-island settlement. You even name it, St. Harold's Rock. Has a ring to it. Then, without warning, the ground rumbles. A tremor beneath your feet. Cuthbert shrieks like a goat. The island begins to move, sliding forward in one terrible, slow-motion heave. You tumble backward into the waves, watching as St. Harold's Rock sprouts a tail and submerges into the sea. You, my friend, have just tried to camp on a whale. Historians still argue whether this happened often or whether medieval people just really loved a good sea story. But the tale survives, not just in whispered monastic halls, but carved into illuminated manuscripts, where islands grow eyes and fires smolder on whalebacks like birthday candles. The monkish worldview, after all, had room for mystery. A lot of room. The world map, basically a decorative tray. Compass? What's that? The wind tells you where to go. And maybe divine intervention helps. You and Cuthbert float in stunned silence, your robes clinging to you like wet moss. Perhaps, he says, dripping, it was a demon, or maybe a lazy island, you mutter, and he nods solemn, because back then, if a thing didn't make sense, you didn't doubt your senses. You just found a reason, and lazy island that swims away when disturbed was honestly less weird than a lot of explanations they were working with. You paddle onward, slightly more skeptical of landforms now. Everything seems like it could be watching you, breathing even, especially the big ones. The next few days pass in a blur of salt, sun, and suspicious floating masses. You dream of land that doesn't blink, and sleep on the edge of your coracle, wary of islands that sigh. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls from a ship that never appears. You tighten your robe against the wind and swear off fire-making. Just for a while. Besides, you've already been baptized today. By whale. The next time you see one, you don't call it an island. You call it a test. It's the third dusk in a row where the mist hangs low and your hands are raw from rowing. Brother Cuthbert is now composing sea psalms out loud, one of which rhymes barnacle with miracle. You pretend not to hear him. You're too focused on the shape ahead. It's rounder than the last, smoother, like a hill rising from the sea, its curves gleaming in the waning amber light. Waves slap against its sides, lazily, like it's too tired to submerge. You stay back this time, letting the boat drift in slow circles. It's not moving, yet Cuthbert, to your dismay, is already unwrapping the flint. I've got some dried eel. We can cook it. You slap the flint out of his hands. That's how we lost the tent. We didn't have a tent. We almost had a tent. He sulks for the rest of the evening. And you watch. Watch as the not island occasionally exhales a stream of mist. A subtle giveaway. A sigh that comes from somewhere beneath. Eventually, the mound slips downward gently this time and vanishes into the deep like a dream you forget while it's still happening. You're not the first to fall for it. Medieval chronicles across Europe are cluttered with versions of your experience. A monk on the coast of Normandy reported building a chapel on a new landmasonry for it to disappear overnight. Spanish sailors once mapped a floating meadow that bellowed when touched. And Norse legends? They speak of great beasts that pose as stone until you poke them. The phenomenon wasn't just folklore, it was a trend. Across centuries, mistake after mistake, generation after generation. The Atlantic, it seems, had a dark sense of humor. Historians still argue whether these were embellishments, confused sightings of actual whale species, or the medieval way of explaining something profoundly uncomfortable. The ocean didn't care if you knew what it was doing. Cartographers' poor souls tried to help. Early seafarers sketched dotted lines and squiggly beasts with notes like "Beware false lands" or "This one moved." Not especially helpful, but it did make the maps more exciting. And in a world where science was mostly herbal teas and bleeding patients, why wouldn't people believe whales were giant animals too lazy to swim unless disturbed? Some monks theorized they were divine warnings. Others suggested they were fallen angels, cursed to drift forever. One German monk even insisted whales were portals to purgatory, based solely on the fact that one had belched near his abbey. You recall now an old text you once copied, painfully, letter by letter. A beast named Aspidokellan, part whale, part sea turtle, all confusion. It lured sailors to land, then sank beneath them like an underwater prankster. Your quill had smudged halfway through. You blamed damp ink. But maybe it was the universe hinting. Don't trust anything that floats quietly. Now, as your boat drifts silently on a sheet of glass water, you glance around. Nothing but sea and sky. And somewhere beneath you, a thing the size of a house just rolled over in its sleep. Still, you wonder why so many stories? Why so believable? Maybe it's because whales really do surface in stillness. Maybe they look like islands because we want something to rest on. Something solid in all this bobbing chaos. Even if it snores, you let the boat drift. No paddling, no prayers, just silence. The moon climbs, a pale coin in the sky, and for a fleeting second, you think you see another island in the distance. But tonight, you're not moving toward it. Let it sleep. Morning arrives with a wet slap to the face. Cuthbert's paddle, of course. There's something out there, he says, squinting. and it's either an island or it's about to sneeze. You peer through half-lidded eyes at a distant shape breaking the water's surface like a loaf of bread rising from soup. You've seen this dance before, but today feels different. Maybe it's the way the air smells like kelp and old honey. Maybe it's the way seagulls keep circling but won't land. Either way, you row closer, because curiosity is your worst habit. The hump doesn't move. That's the first sign it's definitely a whale. Island, Cuthbert declares confidently, standing up far too quickly and nearly tipping the boat. You sigh. You've both fallen for this before, but your curiosity is tinged now with something else. Recognition. Not of the whale itself, but of a story. One you heard whispered during quiet hours in the Abbey's scriptorium. The tale of St. Brendan and the fire-backed beast. St. Brendan, the navigator, or as you like to call him, that guy who got everyone wet, once set out with a group of monks to find the Isle of Paradise. You remember the details because the illustrations were dramatic. Boats made of animal hide, monks in matching robes, and a whale. A really big whale. The story goes that Brendan and his crew landed on what they thought was an island sound familiar. Built a fire, started roasting fish, maybe even sang a psalm or two. The moment the fire got cozy, the island began to shake, pitching the monks into the water like breadcrumbs off a cutting board. The island turned out to be Jasconius, a whale so large it was mistaken for land. Multiple times. Monks scrambled. Salters were lost. One even claimed the whale gave him a knowing look as it dove. That part's less believable but somehow makes the most sense. You and Cuthbert aren't lighting any fires today. Instead, you just float by, staring. There's something calming about Itha's giant, unmoving mass of meat and mystery. You swear it's exhaling in rhythm with the waves. Whales were more than animals to your kind. In monasteries, stories about them filled margins of hand-copied books, little doodles of whales smiling or looking vaguely annoyed. These weren't just animals. They were metaphors. One manuscript you helped copy once compared the whale to the devil. Hiding in plain sight, tempting men with rest, then dragging them under. Bit dramatic, really. Another called it a test of faith. One monk, clearly sleep-deprived, theorized the whale was a backslidden angel exiled. Not evil, just extremely tired. Historians still debate whether monks genuinely believed in Jasconius or used the story to teach obedience. After all, it's hard to argue with your superior if he can say, "At least I didn't light a campfire on a whale." Still, as ridiculous as the stories sound, they served a purpose. They turned the terrifying unknown into something narratable, digestible. You can't control the sea, but you can explain it, even if your explanation involves a giant, deceptively comfy fish. As you circle the whale, it finally moves just slightly. A twitch of the tail, a subtle ripple. Cuthbert whispers, "Do you think it knows we're here?" You glance at the massive eye peeking above the water. "Honestly, I think it's judging us." You spend the rest of the morning in silence, drifting beside the creature, letting it teach you what it means to be truly still. Monks talk a lot about patience. Whales live it. Eventually, it dives, slow and deliberate, leaving only a trail of mist and a gentle dip in the ocean's surface. You feel the space it leaves behind like the warmth of a body after it leaves a room. You look at Cuthbert. "Still think it was an island?" He shrugs. "A lazy one." You both laugh quietly, the kind of laugh people use when they know the sea can still hear them. You and Cuthbert finally reach something solid enough to count as real land, a mossy stretch of coast shaped like a sleeping boar. You both collapse onto it like shipwrecked sandwiches, robes wrinkled, dignity soggy. The sky is doing that dramatic gray thing again, like it's trying to decide between rain or theatrical lighting. By now, you're not even surprised when the first thing you see on shore is a map carved into a slate slab. Not a great one. There's a sea creature roughly the shape of a teapot and some very stern Latin text that may or may not say, "Don't trust the ocean." You trace the lines, flinching at a familiar doodle. A large, rounded creature with trees drawn on its back. A monk's attempt, you guess, to depict a whale pretending to be an island. Back in the Abbey, you once helped ink the edges of a mappa mundi, those beautiful, wildly inaccurate medieval world maps. And every single one of them had a section dedicated to monsters. Dragons, manticores, sea bishops with tiny miters, and of course, the lazy whale island, usually drawn mid-nap, sometimes with a smile. You remember one peculiar map with a Latin caption that read, Mons Bellini Dormientes, Mountain of the Sleeping Whale. It had an asterisk beside it. The footnote just said, "Don't light fires here." Charming. Cuthbert's staring at it too. I once heard they painted whales with halos. They do, you say, if they look especially bored. It's not even a joke. You recall flipping through a bestiary, one of those illustrated encyclopedias of animals that monks loved to make, and seeing a whale described not only as a sea creature, but as a symbol of sloth. Yes, sloth. The sin. Apparently, if a whale doesn't move much, it's morally suspect. The description went something like, "The whale is as the idle man, who lies in comfort until stirred by fire." Harsh. So now it's not just a whale. It's a lesson. Be not as the whale, lest you be cast into laziness. Or worse, ignited. It was a very medieval thing to do, assigning moral value to animals. Owls? Wisdom. Foxes? Deceit. Whales? Nap crimes. You remember a fringe tale from a French abbey. Some poor monk dreamed that a whale was listening to his confessions, just floating offshore, blinking slowly as he poured out his guilt. The dream ended when the whale told him, in perfect Latin, "Maybe you're the lazy one." He woke up and fasted for a week. Historians still argue whether medieval monks truly believed whales had inner lives or whether they were using them as neat narrative tools. Likely both. After all, when you live in a stone room with one window and your best friend is a candle, you start assigning personalities to everything. You can almost imagine the conversation among scribes. "Did you finish the lion chapter?" "Yes. I made it proud and judgmental." "And the whale?" "Oh, it naps. A lot. But like, on purpose." One odd scroll you once read even suggested that whales chose to be mistaken for islands because they were lonely. Now that's a personality. You and Cuthbert wander a little further inland and find the remnants of a monastic hut, old stone, overgrown with vines, but still standing. Inside, carved onto the wall, is a familiar phrase, "Beware the beasts who do not chase." You wonder who wrote it. Maybe someone like you. Maybe someone who lit a fire on the back of something ancient and got flung into the sea like a tossed pebble. You sit quietly for a while. The waves outside are gentle. The sky finally chooses rain, soft and steady. And somewhere in your mind, you picture a whale, huge and sleepy, blinking slowly beneath the surface, waiting for some overeager monk to try and roast fish on its spine again. Honestly, you can't blame it. You're back on the water now, your little boat slipping through calm waves like a beetle across silk. The clouds have parted, reluctantly, and the sea looks like it's pretending to behave. You and Cuthbert say nothing. The silence is comfortable now. like an old wool blanket, slightly itchy, but warm. You've spent days in the company of creatures you've never quite seen and stories that feel half-truth, half-dream. But today, your head is filled with a very specific scroll. An Icelandic saga, to be exact. One that told the tale of a man who lived on a whale for a week. You chuckle, because of course he did. The story scratched into old vellum with ink that smelled of seaweed, and sheep spoke of a fisherman who landed on what he thought was an abandoned sea rock, a place of moss and stillness. He built a shelter, lit a fire, even tethered his horse. Yes, somehow he brought a horse. Icelanders are efficient. Days passed. Then one night, the island groaned, rose, and began to drift. Historians still debate whether this was a folktale, a hallucination caused by sea rot, or most hilariously a true incident with an absurdly chill whale. You lean toward the last theory, because if there's one thing you've learned, it's that the ocean doesn't care what you think is happening. You remember how the saga ended, too. The man leapt off just as the island dove, his horse less lucky, becoming, as the saga politely put it, a gift to the sea, a moment of silence for that horse. You imagine the whale's point of view, drifting peacefully, then suddenly saddled with a man, a tent, a fire, and a horse. No wonder it left. And in that absurdity, there's something oddly comforting. The world, especially back then, didn't come with explanations, just vibes. You saw what you saw, believed what made sense, and chalked the rest up to either God or very lazy demons. So monks filled the gaps. They called whales sleepy mountains, gave them backstories, painted them into illuminated manuscripts with tree-covered backs and saintly halos. One particularly ambitious artist even drew a whale with a chapel on its spine doors and all, as if deep down they wished the lie were true, that whales could be land, that something solid might rise from the sea when you need it most. It's this longing, perhaps, that made the stories stick. The monkish belief that even if the world was wet and cold and confusing, there were still sacred mysteries floating in it. Big ones, quiet ones, lazy ones. Cuthbert shifts in the boat. You think we'll see another one? You look out at the horizon, where the water shimmers in long sighs of light. If we do, you say, we're not lighting a fire. He nods solemnly, and then just for a moment you see it. A ripple, too large for a wave, too smooth for wind. Something just beneath the surface, vast and slow and watching. You freeze. It lingers, then slips away. You look at Cuthbert. He's pale. Did it just, he begins. Blink at us? You finish. You both sit in silence for a while, because sometimes there are no further questions. Only the ocean, the stories it swallows, and the ones it lets float. It's almost dinner time, and you're trying to decide whether a sea creature counts as fish, meat, or divine riddle. You and Cuthbert have beached the boat for a brief stop somewhere unmarked, somewhere soft with sand and sharp with wind. You've built a small fire this time on actual land. Thank you very much. And you're roasting something vaguely fish-shaped that washed ashore. It smells edible. Just Cuthbert pokes at it with a stick. You know, he says thoughtfully, some monks believed whales were sent by God to test us. You raise an eyebrow. With snacks. With temptation. You both stare at the fish, which is already beginning to look less like a moral dilemma and more like lunch. But the question lingers, what were whales to your people? To monks, whales weren't just beasts, they were metaphors in blubber. Living sermons. Sin with a tail. Depending on the region, they were gluttons, sloths, or deceivers. Monks who lived by the sea had endless time to watch them and assign meaning to their strange, lazy grandeur. One old manuscript you once copied for 6 miserable days, called whales beasts of indulgence, claiming their vast size was due to never fasting. That's right somewhere in your abbey scriptorium. There exists an illuminated letter W with a whale drawn mid-bite, surrounded by bread loaves, fish bones, and a wine cup. No kidding. And yet, at the same time, whales were food. Precious food. A dead whale meant oil, bones, meat, and weeks of not chewing hard biscuits. And in those times of theological mental gymnastics, the question arose, was a whale a beast of the land or a fish of the deep? Because you see, eating meat was forbidden on Fridays, but fish, totally fine. So came the strange legal rulings. In some coastal abbeys, whales were ruled to be cold-blooded fish. In others, it depended on which part you ate. The tongue, apparently, was more sinful than the flipper. Historians still argue whether these classifications were driven by doctrine or desperation. Likely both. When you're hungry enough, even heresy can be seasoned. You remember hearing about a debate that lasted 2 years over whether seals were fish. A bishop allegedly weighed in with, "If it smells like the sea, let them eat it." Practical theology at its finest. You look down at your roasted maybe fish. What if it's part whale, you ask? Cuthbert shrugs. Then only half a sin. You both eat. And in the soft chewing silence, you wonder if the whales know. If they sense how confused humanity is about their purpose. Demon? Dinner? Divine metaphor? A wave crashes in the distance. You take another bite. And somewhere far beneath the ocean, a whale turns slowly in its sleep, unaware that 2 soggy monks just debated its immortal soul over salted fins. The coast you're following now is jagged and cold, a line of dark volcanic cliffs that jut out like broken teeth. This is Iceland, or at least the edge of it, and everything smells like ash, seawater, and centuries of hard decisions. You're cold. You're damp, and according to Cuthbert, this is the place where monks once lived on a whale. The story arrived in your abbey by way of a fish trader who couldn't read, but could recite a saga like it was a bedtime prayer. You didn't believe him then, but now, trudging along this eerily quiet coast, you wonder. According to the tale, a fisherman named Olafur landed on an unmapped island after a storm. He was alone, but his boat was intact. The island had no trees, no animals, and no sound. Just soft moss and a strange, rhythmic pulsing beneath the ground. Still, it was shelter, and Olafur needed shelter. So, naturally, he built a hut. Day 1, nothing happened. Day 2, the ground trembled slightly. By day 4, he'd built a small fire pit and was roasting dried herring beside it. He claimed the smoke disappeared oddly fast, like the wind was being sucked downward. By day 6, the island moved. Not fast, just a gentle tilt enough to roll the fish into the fire and send Olafur sprinting. The mossy landmass reared upward. A great ice surfaced nearby, and then Splash It vanished into the sea. Olafur made it to shore, bedraggled, barefoot, and ranting. The locals laughed. Then, a few months later, another fisherman returned with the same story. And then another. Icelanders, naturally, did what anyone would do. They named the creature. Hafguffa, the Seereeker, sometimes Lingbacker, the Heatherback. Both names hinted at the same idea. A whale so massive it could pass for terrain, and rude enough to leave without warning. Some versions of the saga say Olafur stayed a full week on the creature before it dove. He built fences, cooked soup, held conversations with himself. One version even suggests he wrote poetry, and somehow the whale tolerated it. Historians still debate whether this saga was allegory, mistaken geography, or just excellent boredom-fueled storytelling. But the locals believed it. In fact, maps from the time started labeling certain areas suspected whale territory. As if that clarified anything. You and Cuthbert find a tattered old rune stone near a cliff's edge. The carvings are worn, but you can make out what looks suspiciously like a house. On a whale's back, there's even a chimney. You turn to Cuthbert. He lived on it? He shrugs. Maybe it was tired. It's not the worst theory. There's something beautifully absurd about the idea that a creature could be so big, so still, and so tolerant that a man could set up shop on its spine. But you've seen stranger. Back at your monastery, there was a long, dry debate over whether whales could feel shame. One monk argued that if they were once land animals as suggested by their bones, then their retreat to the sea must have been an act of spiritual cowardice. Another monk just snored through that part. You glance out at the water, suddenly suspicious of every dark patch of ocean, every bulge of wave. Is that a sandbar or a spine? You step back instinctively. It's one thing to believe in monsters. It's another to think they might politely host you before disappearing forever. You're back inside the abbey now. Well, not your abbey exactly. This one is colder, older, and frankly smells worse. A place further inland, where the monks copy texts so old the Latin is practically passive-aggressive. You're seated at a wooden desk, candle flickering, quill in hand, staring down a parchment leaf of De Bestiis Marinis, the monastic bestiary of sea creatures. It's beautifully illustrated, but also clearly made by someone who had never seen the ocean in his life. And yet, here it is, the whale, massive, lumpy, and unmistakably frowning. It's reclining across the page like it's given up entirely. On life, on swimming, on trying. The monk who painted it added 2 trees growing from its back. And, of course, a small group of delighted travelers building a tent. You turn the page. Another image. The whale, now yawning, while a hapless sailor dangles from a makeshift flagpole. You have questions. According to the accompanying text written in that formal, judgmental Latin monk's love, the whale represents the idle soul who offers comfort to others, but brings them ruin when he himself is stirred. In short, the whale is lazy, not just in behavior, in morality. You blink. This whale just got slandered in calligraphy. Cuthbert, nearby, reads over your shoulder. Ah, the sin of sloth, he says knowingly, as if he didn't just nap through morning prayers. The medieval world loved turning animals into lessons. Beavers were chaste. Lions were noble. Basilisks were discouraging. But whales got painted as deceptive lumps, lounging in the sea like they called in sick to being monsters. Some texts claimed whales pretended to be islands out of sheer spite, that they delighted in fooling travelers, and once the fires were lit, they dove purely out of vengeance. One very enthusiastic scribe even suggested whales timed their surfacing to coincide with human confusion. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were theological metaphors or just monks projecting their own fatigue onto nature. It's a fair guess. After all, if you're a sleep-deprived scribe who hasn't seen the outdoors in 7 months, the idea of a nap beast disturbing travelers might seem deeply relatable. There's a fringe belief found in a particularly crusty Flemish margin note that whales were originally land animals who were banished for laziness, that they now drifted the oceans as a kind of eternal timeout. their refusal to move unless provoked, divine punishment, or maybe passive resistance. You find one bestiary page with an annotation. The whale is proof God has a sense of humor. No argument there. You and Cuthbert continue leafing through pages. You find another illustration of the same whale, this time with a monk riding it like a chaise lounge. There's even a caption that reads, "Be wary of comfort not granted by effort." Cuthbert taps it. Is that about me? Only if you start growing barnacles. By the time the candle dies, your head is full of lumpy backs, judgmental whale eyes, and monks who clearly had too much time and not enough swimming experience. And yet, in all this moralizing, you feel a twinge of admiration for the whales, for their stillness, their ability to just exist, without fanfare, without needing to impress anyone. Maybe being a lazy island isn't so bad after all. The cloister is quiet tonight, too quiet. Really, you're sitting beneath the old vaulted arches, the kind that drip a little when it rains, which is always. Cuthbert has found his way into an argument with Brother Alwyn, one of those monks who quotes scripture and his own diary as if both were divinely inspired. The topic? Naturally, the whale. Demons, Alwyn says, firmly, slamming shut a worn copy of Physiologus. The creature is an illusion, a temptation. It pretends to be land, so that men will rest upon it and be consumed. Cuthbert, not missing a beat, replies, "You just described my Uncle Rupert. You sip your barley tea and stare into the middle distance, where a tapestry of St. Brendan hangs limply on the wall. The saint is pointing dramatically at what is clearly a whale with suspiciously human eyebrows. The stitched caption reads, 'Beware the quiet ones. Classic Brendan. This isn't the first debate this week. Every monk in the cloister seems to have a different theory. Some say the whale is a test of faith. Others, a divine punishment. A few clearly hungry argue it's a misunderstood blessing filled with flammable oil and hearty meat. You chime in. What if the whale doesn't mean anything? Gasps. Alwyn drops his mug. Cuthbert stares at you like you just denounced cheese. You continue gently. What if it's just a creature? Big, strange, and not especially invested in our sins. There's a long pause. Historians still argue whether monks ever allowed for this kind of thinking. The idea that not everything had to be symbolic or sinful or a divine threat. Some abbeys leaned mystical, yes, but others, especially those closer to the Semite VE, just learned to accept that whales were simply there. Big, wet, inconvenient. Brother Alwyn recovers. Then what of the legend of Brother Ivor, who mistook a whale for penance and spent 40 days fasting on its back? Wasn't he also the one who tried to baptize a storm cloud? That's irrelevant. These kinds of arguments filled the dark corners of the cloister. Little debates over candlelight and cold bread. They were more than theological exercises, they were ways of coping. With weather, with fear, with the knowledge that most of the world was unknowable and damp. The candle between you flickers, and for a moment the shadows cast strange shapes on the wall long, curved, like a back just beneath the water. I still think the whale represents indulgence, Alwyn says, quieter now. Maybe, you reply, or maybe it just wants a nap. Later, when the others have gone to their cells, you sit alone and listen to the wind moaning through the stone halls. Sounds like breathing, deep, steady, ancient, and you wonder, not what the whale represents but what it remembers. A world before boats, before maps, before monks assigning metaphors. Maybe the whale just floats through time, occasionally hosting confused travelers, occasionally flicking them off like crumbs. Maybe its only sin is being too big to ignore. You blow out the candle. The shadows vanish, but in your mind, the great creature keeps drifting, unbothered. You're walking along a beach now, a long, narrow stretch of pebbled coastline where the wind howls sideways and the air smells of salt and second chances. The tide has gone out, revealing a battlefield of seaweed, broken shells, and something very large decaying quietly in the sand. Cuthbert stands beside it, arms crossed. Is it a whale? You squint. Could be. It's definitely a form or something. Huge, ridged, the size of a house collapsed in on itself. The smell is hard to ignore. It's halfway between old cheese and a theology debate gone sour. A few locals stand nearby, poking the carcass with long sticks. One of them mutters, "Could be a sea dragon. Could be a punishment." Another says, "Definitely a sign. Look at the tail." The tail in question is curled, rigid like it changed its mind too late. You've heard of this. Whales that beach themselves for no apparent reason. Dozens at once, even. A behavior that terrified people then, just as much as it confuses scholars now. Historians still argue whether it's magnetic confusion, illness, or something more eerie. To the medieval mind, it was unthinkable. Why would something that ruled the sea choose to die on land? Some said it was divine retribution giants who overstepped their bounds. Others called it suicide. A few monks speculated whales were prophets, sensing oncoming plagues and sacrificing themselves to warn us. Dramatic? Absolutely. But then, drama was a monastic specialty. You kneel beside the beached creature. Its eye is half open, cloudy, like it's tired of explanations, tired of metaphors. There's an odd reverence in the air. Nobody talks loudly. Even the wind seems to hush. You recall a scroll from your abbey's archivisa letter from a coastal monk who once tried to save a beached whale by baptizing it. Sprinkled it with holy water. Brother Morvis. It died anyway. He fasted for 3 days. Cuthbert crouches beside you. Why do they do it? He asks. You shake your head. Maybe they forget they can't breathe here. Or maybe they just want to feel something different. The body before you has already begun to change. Gulls keep their distance. Crabs scuttle in and out. It will return to the sea, piece by piece, taken by tide and time. And in the weeks to come, it will become a story. Children will say it was a sea monster. Pilgrims will say it was a sign. Monks will write verses about divine decay and the lesson of pride. But you'll remember it as it is. A shape, a silence, a mistake maybe, or maybe not. You and Cuthbert walk on, leaving behind the beast and its mystery. The beach narrows. The sky grows dim. And behind you, the tide begins to rise again. Your fingers are stained with ink again. You're back in the scriptorium, hunched over a borrowed scroll from a Roman collector, something old, brittle, and far too impressed with itself. The author? Pliny the Elder. Pliny, for all his reputation, wrote like a man determined to include everything, whether he understood it or not. His Naturalis Historia, massive encyclopedia of everything from elephants to eyelashes, has an entire section on sea creatures, and naturally that includes whales. Big whales. Weird whales. Whales with arms. Whales that eat ships. Whales that disguise themselves as floating hills. Sound familiar? Cuthbert is seated across from you, chewing noisily on a carrot. He leans over and reads aloud in a serious voice. There are whales so large that they resemble floating islands and snort water so forcefully they create fog. You blink. Wait, that's almost accurate. Don't get used to it, he says, flipping the scroll. The next line says one of them swallowed 3 pirates and a goat. Classic Pliny. The thing about Pliny was that he treated everything as equally plausible. Mermaid? Sure. Volcano inside a whale? Why not? Whale with trees on its back that lures sailors to their doom. That one he actually seemed excited about. Historians still argue how much Pliny believed in what he wrote. Some say he was collecting folklore. Others say he believed it all. You suspect he was just trying to impress someone. You keep reading. According to Pliny, whales in the Indian Ocean were different from those in the Atlantic. Bigger, more malicious, more prone to strategic thinking. One reportedly stalked a fishing village for a week, waiting until market day before beaching itself to eat everyone. Cuthbert raises an eyebrow. Tactical whale. Very. And then you find a passage that started a dozen monastic legends. There exists a creature so vast, it appears as land, and if men build upon it, the creature descends and all is lost. That line was copied, quoted, whispered into the ears of novice monks as a warning. It showed up in bestiaries, sermons, even stained glass. You once saw a chapel window that depicted the very moment. Monks scrambling off a giant, sinking fish, arms flailing, hair improbably neat. Pliny never gave the creature a name. Later scribes called it Aspidicolonia, a name that made its way into nearly every medieval monster list thereafter. The name stuck because it sounded like something sacred, something old, something that might still be out there. You close the scroll, your head spinning with half-facts and sea steam. What if Pliny was right? Cuthbert asks. About tactical whales? About the ones that pretend to be land. You think of the coastline you've traveled. The shapes that slumber just beneath the waves. The stories that match too closely to be coincidence. You think of the sighing sea and the strange way it seems to watch. Maybe Pliny didn't get everything right. But maybe, just maybe, he saw something true and did what every good storyteller does. He made it bigger. The fog rolls in thick today, so thick you could lean on it. The sea is hidden behind a curtain of damp air, and every sound is muffled, like the world's been wrapped in wool. You and Cuthbert are on high ground, squinting into the nothingness, listening for the soft slap of waves or worse. Because there's a smell, not the usual salt and seaweed, but something scorched. A little like burnt feathers, a little like regret. You find the source tangled among rocks near the shore, a vast carcass, twisted, half buried in kelp, dotted with barnacles the size of apples. The spine curves unnaturally. The skull is pointed. The tail ends in something that looks far too decorative for a fish. Cuthbert gasps. It's a dragon. You tilt your head. It's a whale. Noit's a dragon. It has baleen, Cuthbert. He's not listening. He's already crossing himself and whispering verses from the Book of Revelations. The thing is, Cuthbert might have a point. The carcass is unusual. Long, winding. The ribs curve out of the flesh like sails on a broken ship. One eye socket gapes toward the sky as if asking, what happened? And the teeth, well, there are some teeth, but also not enough. And why does it smell faintly of cinnamon? You've seen whales before. You've read about dragons. And this could pass for either, or both. Back in the monastery, you once copied a chart labeled Creaturey Intermediate Creatures. It included illustrations of mermaids, dog-headed men, and, yes, a creature labeled Draco Marinus, drawn suspiciously like a whale with wings. The note beside it read, Discovered by sailors, confirmed by friars, ignored by Rome. Historians still argue about medieval sea dragons. Were they real sightings of decayed whales? Giant oarfish? Hallucinations after long voyages? Or just people trying to reconcile a vast, strange world with too few categories? The bestiaries didn't help. One claimed dragons lived in underwater caves and only surfaced during storms. Another insisted they flew over the sea, breathing smoke from blowholes. A third said they lured sailors with songs and then flapped back into the deep. That last one might have been plagiarized from siren myths, but no one checked citations back then. You kneel beside the carcass and run your fingers along its barnacled spine. The flesh is cold, rubbery, not fresh, but not ancient. A creature recently claimed by the seer spat back. Cuthbert, still watching from a safe distance, asks, "Should we do something?" "Like what?" "I don't know. Read a psalm? Set it on fire." Fire didn't work out well the last time. He grumbles but says no more. Instead, you both sit in the fog, the dragon whale beside you, the sea just beyond sight. And for a long while, nothing happens, which feels significant. You imagine the monks who would find this and turn it into an illuminated manuscript. Maybe they'd draw wings where there were none. Maybe they'd give it horns. Maybe they'd write that it flew from the abyss, croaked a warning about sin, and exploded in divine light. Or maybe someone like you would just draw it as it was. A body, a mystery, something in between. And maybe that would be enough. The road is muddy, narrow, and smells faintly of fish, which, in fairness, is appropriate since you're now escorting a band of pilgrims along the coast of Brittany, their sandals squishing with every step, their prayers growing louder as the sky darkens. Cuthbert is trying to cheer them up by handing out pickled pilchards. No one's impressed. You've agreed to guide them to a coastal shrine said to hold the toe bone of a saint who once blessed the tide to retreat for a wedding. You're not sure if that's theology or tourism, but they've walked too far to question it now. The path hugs the edge of the sea, rising and falling with the cliffs. Beneath it all, the Atlantic grumbles like an old monk annoyed at being asked one question too many. As night falls, you find shelter in a tiny stone chapel long abandoned, mostly roof, some walls. In one corner stands a squat metal lamp, its wick blackened and dry. You search your sack for oil, and there it is, a small flask of something dense, yellowish, and sticky. Whale oil, salvaged from your last visit to that village near the dragon whale incident. The flask had been passed to you with the kind of reverence usually reserved for relics or good cheese. You dab a little into the lamp and strike a flint. It sputters. Cuthbert hovers behind you, hopeful. Do you think it's still good? You shrug and strike again. The lamp ignites with a hump and then immediately coughs out a cloud of smoke so dense it smells like an eel wrapped in regret. The pilgrims begin coughing. One starts humming a hymn. Another mutters something about cursed oil. You open the chapel door to vent the smoke, only for a gust of wind to blow the flame out. A beat of silence. Then Cuthbert, ever helpful, says, "Maybe the whale didn't want to help tonight." You glare at him. Or maybe it's just not very flammable anymore. Either way, the lamp is dead, and the chapel is now filled with the gentle odor of ancient sea beast. You pass the night in near darkness. The pilgrims eventually fall asleep, huddled together for warmth. You lie near the open doorway, staring out at the moonlit water, the air thick with damp and old oil, and you think about all the monks before you who tried to bend the sea to their needs. They used whale oil to light their manuscripts, to soften their skin in winter, to heat their narrow cells. They carved whale bones into combs, crossbars, crucifixes. One even claimed to make a flute from a whale rib, though the result was described as mournful and shrill. Historians still argue whether this was reverence or resourcefulness. Perhaps both. Perhaps, like everything in your odd monastic life, the line between the sacred and the practical is blurred by wind and candle smoke. You doze off thinking about the whale huge, floating, unbothered somewhere beneath those waves, probably sleeping, definitely not helping, and somehow that's comforting. You dock again. Just a brief stop, salt-stung hands, empty stomach, a bit of land that doesn't seem to breathe. This one's real. Definitely. Probably. A few stones mark the edge of what must have once been a chapel. It's nothing but ruins now, crumbling walls, half a window, and the sad, ironic echo of waves lapping inside. You imagine sermons delivered to an audience of fish, pews filled with crustaceans politely clapping their claws. Cuthbert pokes around and finds a rusted lamp. You think it still works? No, you answer flatly, but that doesn't stop him from fiddling with it anyway. Eventually, he finds a small, cracked jug beside it. The label's long faded, but the smell is unmistakable. Whale oil. You raise your eyebrows. Someone tried to light a chapel with a whale. Technically on a whale, he mutters, grinning. The irony isn't lost on you. Medieval pilgrims believed whale oil could light their way to holiness. That burning the body of the sea's greatest beast was somehow divine. That every part of the whale from bones to blubber was a spiritual tool, if used correctly. Historians still argue whether this stemmed from reverence or convenience. Probably both. The medieval mind loved symbols, but it loved heat even more, especially in wind-chilled stone rooms filled with damp parchment and moldy bread. You once saw a scroll that swore an entire abbey was heated by the light of the sea beasts. That abbey later burned down. Probably unrelated. Probably. Cuthbert eventually gets the lamp to flicker. The flame dances weakly, casting a quivering glow on the chapel walls. You both sit in silence, the only warmth coming from that struggling whale flame. Outside, the sea remains unimpressed, and for a moment, you imagine a whale somewhere in the distance raising a sleepy fin in protest. Not angry, just tired of being flammable. You smirk, because even now, after everything, after islands that swam, maps that lied, and monks who thought whales were demons in disguise, you still believe, deep in your sea-worn soul, that it's better to light a single whale oil lamp than to curse the darkness. Just maybe not on a whale. The boat rocks gently again. You've lost track of how many days it's been, how many times the sea has changed moods on you. From mirror calm to storm snarled, from whispering to roaring. Tonight, though, it is a lullaby, a cradle. The sea at last has nothing to prove. You lie on your back, the stars spinning slowly above like ancient script, written not in Latin, but in some older, softer language only whales understand. Cuthbert is asleep again, curled beneath a spare robe, one sandal still on, snoring like a cow in prayer. And you are not trying to find an island, or a chapel, or a creature. You are simply here, drifting, and that makes all the difference. The ocean you feared, the one filled with deceptive backs and fake islands, with beasts too big to name, has become something else. Not safe, not really, but familiar, like a very old friend who talks in riddles and smells like salt. Somewhere beneath you, something vast shifts, not threatening, not stirring, just adjusting its spine. You imagine it. The great whale, the lazy island, turning in sleep, letting out a slow bubble of breath that rises silently to the surface. You don't move. You don't speak. You simply listen. And as your eyes grow heavy, as your thoughts slow to the pace of waves and wind, you find yourself grateful for the myths, the mistakes, the monks who built fires on backs, the scribes who drew halos on whales, even the ones who thought the tongue was sinful but the flipper was fine. They were trying like you are now to understand something enormous, something that doesn't need to make sense. And tonight, that's enough. The boat rocks once, twice, then holds. The stars blur. The breath of the sea is warm and wide. Sleep takes you gently, as if carried on the back of something quiet.